Hey guys, it's Alex and welcome to the Geeks Table. If you ever ask a bicycle enthusiast about which bike you should buy, they will happily tell you that there are city bikes, road bikes, mountain bikes, gravel bikes, and you most certainly should buy one of each kind. But is it the case with these three cameras? Should we buy Fujifilm X100VI, Ricoh GR4, and the iPhone 17 Pro Max all together to bring balance and harmony to our photo library? Or shall we be alright with just one of them? I've used them alongside each other for almost 5 months, so let's have a closer look together. And for the context, I'm not a professional photographer who can buy lots of cameras and tax them as business expense. It's my hobby. I mostly take photos during vacation or when I go for a walk. To add more to the context, I'm very lazy, so 3 things can make me happy. Less similar photos to choose from, less editing and post, and less gear to carry. I wish to have a gadget that is light, which produces the photos that I like, and they would require almost zero tweaking before sharing them. If you're in the same boat, welcome aboard. If you're deciding between these cameras, and yes, I'll be calling the iPhone 17 Pro Max a camera because, frankly speaking, we don't care about anything else in this video. So if you are deciding between these cameras, the first question you should ask yourself is, what am I going to shoot with this camera? Take the iPhone 17 Pro Max. It has a 3-lens system. You may be the type of person who wants everything in your photo frame, like everything that you see right now. For that, there is the 13mm ultrawide lens for you. Or maybe you are the one who zooms on a detail and you don't really care about the things around it. Then there is a 100mm telephoto lens for you. Or you may be completely into macro photography and nothing pleases you more than a bug on a flower or frozen bubbles of air. Or you may still be deciding which focal length is your favorite. 24mm, 28 or 35. The main camera will happily give you this choice. What I'm trying to say here is that this is a great versatile tool that may help you to decide what you're actually into, because the other 2 cameras are much more restrictive in this case. Let's have a look. Fujifilm X100VI has a fixed 35mm lens. It's a classic field of view and it's good for street photography, landscapes or subjects, so I would also call it versatile, but in its own way. This camera has a 40-megapixel sensor, which means that we can crop, or digitally zoom if you will, to mimic a more tight field of view, and the image quality will still be decent. Out of the box, Fujifilm X100VI supports 50mm and 70mm digital zoom. So if we're lazy to go and crop images afterwards, we have 3 options to do that on location. However, returning back to the topic of what we actually shoot, I found its field of view to be too tight for traveling through old towns of Europe. They may have narrow streets or tall buildings which simply won't fit into the shot. And there is no way to zoom with your feet, as photographers would say, because of how condensed those old European towns are. And I know exactly the camera that could help me with that. This is Ricoh GR4. Its lens has a focal length of approximately 28mm, which puts it very close to the main lens of the iPhone 17 Pro Max. The field of view is wider than the one in the Fujifilm, and it suits perfectly for producing postcards from the places you've been to. Sadly, the sensor is only 26 megapixels. Well, I shouldn't say sadly because it's still a big sensor, but it might not be suitable for cropping. Because zooming digitally into 35mm will offer you a 16 megapixel file, which is not bad. But 50mm will set you off to an 8 megapixel image, and that's quite unfortunate. However, it has a pretty good macro mode, so if you are shooting a mountain landscape and suddenly wish to switch to a flower under your feet, this camera will do that easily. Well, committing to a certain focal length may be hard, so if you have a smartphone with more than one lens, try shooting just with one of them for a day or a week. And that's how it will feel with Fuji or Ricoh. And of course, a favorite focal length is purely a personal choice, so I won't tell you which one is better, because it doesn't make sense. The next thing to consider is the way of how you prefer to take photos. Not the style of your photography, but the way of doing it. Let me explain. The iPhone 17 Pro Max is the snappiest camera of all three. Given it's a phone, it's guaranteed to be in your pocket. So if you prefer to wander around ignoring the casual stuff, but then a squirrel appears or a seagull takes off, and that's what attracts you, the iPhone will definitely be ahead of the other two, because it's most likely in your hand already. Ricoh GR4 is very close though. The start time is just incredible. Just look at it. It's blazing fast. And to make it to focus faster, there is a special mode called Snap Focus. You basically tell which range in meters you'd like to have in focus, and it will do the trick automatically. Not as universal as the iPhone, but still a good solution. And if you find this snap, snap, snap too stressful, then there are shutter or aperture priority modes, or even the manual mode. Fujifilm X100VI to me is the camera of meditation. The rings and controls feel so good that every time I'm about to take a photo, I take my time to play around with them, set all the settings, the frame, the color recipe, double check everything. And returning back to the topic of laziness, this is good. I'm aware of what I'm photographing, which means that I will have less similar photos to choose from later. I tried to use Fujifilm as a snap camera, but the autofocus was a hit or miss. In most cases it's a hit of course, and the result is great, but I remember being in a zoo where I waited for like 5 minutes for a meerkat to look at me. And once it did, it took Fuji 2 seconds to refocus. And of course it was enough for the meerkat to turn away. So yeah, good for the meditation walks. Next thing that you should consider is the environment you're taking photos in. We're talking weather, climate, and even clothes. The iPhone 17 Pro Max got some upgrades and downgrades. It's still waterproof and dustproof, so that's good, but the main downgrade, however, is of course the fact that it's fragile. The aluminium frame is much softer than titanium, so it's a good idea to have it in a case. One of my favorites is from Pitaka. It's super thin, doesn't add a lot of weight to the already chunky phone, and this one also matches the cosmic orange. Moving to upgrades, the screen is now even stronger and more scratch resistant, though I keep using the matte screen protector because it reduces the reflections. But the main upgrade is of course the thermals, alongside the battery life. The iPhone 17 Pro Max doesn't overheat as much as its titanium predecessors, so it was my first ever vacation when I could heavily use camera, navigation and internet, and the battery would survive the full day. Of course, bear in mind that if your photo environment is cold, you'll need special gloves to operate the touchscreen. Cameras with physical controls don't have such problems, of course, so gloves or no gloves, you can operate them easily. Fujifilm X100VI is well built, but it's better to know its limits. First of all, it's not weather resistant, so you have to have an additional filter on to be safe under heavy rain. It also has an exposed cable that connects the screen with the camera, so one should be careful with it. I even have a video where I replaced the broken screen of an X100VI after the liquid damage, but I hope you won't need to watch it anytime soon. Also, some people report that this area gets rubbed off in case your camera contacts your coat or jacket while you're walking. Overall, I'd say it's good for a t-shirt or a hoodie, but it might be a bit cumbersome for a winter coat. Ricoh GR4 is of course much smaller. So pocket of a hoodie, check. Pocket in shorts, check. Pocket in a coat, also check. However, previous generations of the Ricoh GR4 suffered from the motor construction because when it retrieves, it sucks in some air alongside the dust, and it's impossible to clean it out unless you, or at an authorized repair shop, disassembles the camera. Good thing they now claim that GR4 is more dust resistant, and I can actually confirm that. With all the GR4 bodies that I've used during these 5 months, I had no dust problems whatsoever. However, I had another problem. One unit had a faulty motor straight out of the box. A new camera, fully operational, but it wouldn't close the lens when being switched off. I was able to return the camera and get the money back, but it's quite a nasty experience. And as a final nitpick, I don't really like this plug that covers the USB-C port. So in this case, I do prefer the door that the X100VI has. So yeah, the cameras involve more moving parts, so consider that based on the environment you'll be shooting in. Alright, let's switch to the next topic to consider, the picture. And before going deeper into the topic, I should share my opinion on it in terms of laziness. As I've said, I wish to get pictures that require zero or almost zero editing after they were taken. Because when you get tens, hundreds or thousands of photos after a photo walk or a vacation, editing each one of them can be very time consuming and demotivating. However, in order to save days after, I'm totally happy to invest hours prior. I can set the picture styles the way I want them to be, take the photos, and enjoy the results. And these three cameras allow me to do so. Let's have a look. Some people praise the iPhone for its photos, but some get upset with its overprocessed, over-sharpened HDR look. Regardless of that, one thing still baffles me. The stock camera app completely ignores the white balance and always tends to move it to a more neutral look. We have two options to gain more control over this: the third-party camera apps and Apple's very own Photographic Styles. The third-party camera apps have an option to minimize Apple's processing. So for example, Halide camera has a mode called Process Zero, which I'm personally very fond of. I even made a video where I compared it to a decade-old Nokia camera phones. Have a watch if you haven't. The photos look different indeed. They stand out, the film grain for film grain lovers is also there, but there is a limitation from Apple. If you choose to bypass their pipeline, the output is always a 12 megapixel file, even if the shot is made on a 48 megapixel lens. One more app worth mentioning is the Moment camera. It's from the company that became famous producing the external lens for the phones. This app has a similar approach, but unlike Halide, it offers more options to select from. You can invest some time and see which processing you prefer. Of course, the camera apps cost extra, so let's check what we have for free. The Photographic Styles. It's a bit of a weird but effective way of taking back control over the white balance and colors. The styles are built into the camera app, so your viewfinder will show you the end result right away. And they're also built into the Photos app, so you can change the style of a photo later if you wish. And if you have a Mac, you can do the editing there, of course. The styles on the left from the natural one mostly affect the skin tones and not so much the surroundings. And on the contrary, the styles on the right mostly affect everything except the skin tones. If we move the dot horizontally, we will change the color parameter. Move it to the right, and the undersaturated colors will pop, while already saturated ones will be kept as is. Move it to the left, and the image becomes more muted. If we move the dot vertically, it will change the tone parameter. Move it up, and the shadows and mids will go bright. Move it down, and the contrast will increase. And of course, the main slider changes the style's strength. So you may take some sample photos in different conditions, and then play around with these parameters to get the result that you're happy with, and then just use it from there on. The only limitation is that you have to shoot in hike and not in RAW or JPEG, which means that the photos may look a tad more over-sharpened than the RAW files. Alright, the Fuji X100VI, hugely famous for its film simulations. This is probably the easiest way to achieve the dream of zero editing. Pick one of the existing film simulations, shoot in it, and be happy. But since we've agreed to invest some time, there is more to it. First of all, there are lots of so-called recipes, special tweaks that will apply on top of the film simulations. It can be a tweaked white balance, or film grain simulation, or even a dynamic range setting that may preserve your blown-out highlights. So then you can save up to 7 presets, plus the default one, and switch between them depending on the scenario. And the best part, you can play around with these settings in the camera even after you took the shot. The whole process of editing is a bit slow though. You select the photo, tweak the settings, press Q so it would render the new version, and then you either save it or go back to continue the editing. But on the bright side, you don't have to pay any subscription for any photo editor. So the same way as with the iPhone, you can take some photos, then sit and play with the settings, understand which of these recipes work the best for you, and then shoot using them from there on. Alright, it will be hard for Ricoh GR4 to beat Fujifilm, but be ready to be surprised. First of all, it is ridiculously sharp. I saw people comparing Ricoh GR3, the previous generation, to this Fujifilm X100VI, and Ricoh was sharper. I simply love it for that. It doesn't have those fancy film simulations, but it too has recipes. And there is a huge community that develops them and shares with each other. Sadly, the camera has 14 predefined styles and only 3 fully custom ones, but I found that to be enough. Even though I secretly wish them to make those 14 fully customizable too. And now, behold Fujifilm. This is how we can edit photos on Ricoh GR4. Not only it shows the image full size, but it shows the edits in real time. So again, you take a bunch of photos and then play around with the settings until you are satisfied. Then you save them as a custom recipe and shoot in that mode from there on. And if you need a simple crop or white balance change, you don't even have to go to the RAW development menu. Just go over here, do the change, and that's it. Of course, researching for a best recipe on a small camera screen looks a bit strange, let's be honest here. So I questioned myself if I could use the respective first-party apps to do the same thing. And unfortunately, the answer is no. The official first-party apps don't support any editing whatsoever. And that's a real shame. My second question was if I could cast the camera screens to a bigger screen. And in this case, the answer was yes. Ricoh GR4 supports video over the USB-C port, and the Fujifilm X100VI supports casting over the microHDMI. In both cases, the resolution was quite low, and the experience felt unpleasant, but at least I know that it's possible. The ability to store the photos and view them later on a computer would simplify the research, of course. And this enclosure from Acasis helped me so many times, so I had to do a shout out. It's hard to tell, but I'm a big fan of Acasis and never got a penny for a promotion. This enclosure has MagSafe, so no dangling cables, which is good. It fits a full-sized SSD in it, so you can sync photos and videos from your phone to it. And it even has a small fan to keep the things cool. And if you have an SD card from your Fujifilm, or a micro SD card from your Ricoh, or even a USB-C or USB-A flash drive, you can connect them as well. And there is also an HDMI port if you need. Oh, and I almost forgot, you can charge your device up to 100 watts while doing your data sync. It supports 10 gigabits per second transfer speeds, the maximum transfer speed that the iPhone Pro models support, and if you're interested, the non-affiliated link will be in the description. Alright, at this point I realized that it's the best time to switch to the next part, and that's ergonomics. Ergonomics is something that many reviewers don't pay attention to, but they should. Because you can have a great camera with amazing specs, but every time you take it in your hand, you'd accidentally move some dial and change the setting. And that can be very frustrating. So, every Android phone, except maybe OnePlus, can launch the camera app by double-clicking the camera button. Apple, however, implemented every other way of launching a camera to avoid doing it the same way as Android. You can swipe to your left, you can launch it from the lock screen, you can use the action button, or you can use the camera control. If you use the default app, that's great news. However, if you decided to use the third-party camera, you're limited to either launching it via the camera control or via the lock screen. You can make it work from the action button through the shortcuts, but it won't let you open it until you unlock the phone, which affects the speed which we praised the iPhone earlier for. Also, you may be attracted to use the extended functionality of the camera control, for example to switch between the camera settings or lenses, but I turned that feature off. You see, the sensitive surface of the camera control is limited to this area, so when your finger slides across the button, it has no idea when it actually applies the change and when it doesn't. That can be upsetting, sometimes even infuriating, and overall brings miserable experience. Let's move on to the Fujifilm X100VI. So yes, it's a marvel for those who like good old tactile controls. Here's a ring to rotate. I use it for digital zoom. There is also an aperture ring with steps. The shutter speed dial is here on top, and if you lift it up, there is an ISO dial. Remember I said about meditations? It's because it's impossible to switch all these controls with one hand, so you have to be fully committed. But if you ever get over the tactile controls, you can partially or fully switch to these clickable dials, which may be more familiar and also easier to reach. Another praise is to the screen. It supports touch, it's articulating, which is good when you're shooting from your waist level, for example, and it can get very bright, which is perfect on a sunny day. I also have some negatives to share though. One of them is the cold shoe position. If you're using any mount or tripod with your camera, it will block the battery and the SD card slot. Also, yes, the exposure compensation dial cannot be locked in, so you may accidentally move it when grabbing the camera. And of course the micro HDMI. Just why? The joystick is okay, but not without a flaw. When you use the zone focus, this green square that you can move with the joystick, and your camera just hangs on the strap, the clothes may mess up with the joystick, and eventually your focus point moves to one of the sides of the screen. I had this issue so many times. And last but not least, the GR4. The fact that it's so compact brings some benefits. You can literally operate it with one hand. I suggest to use a wrist strap to be on the safe side though. The GR4 to me is really a step up in usability from the GR3. Because now we have this plus-minus button over here, and we have a proper wheel over here. And we don't have a wheel over here, which was really easy to accidentally move. The camera has 53 GB of internal memory, which is good, so you don't have to freak out if you lose a microSD card. And with the microSD mentioned, we move to the shortcomings. The screen is still not articulating, so sometimes it's really hard to compose a shot. And that makes me producing more shots, which I will have to filter out later. Lazy me doesn't like it. The cold shoe has the same problem here. Once anything is on, the battery and the memory cards are locked. And in such case, I would recommend to have a power bank. But since we don't want to carry a lot of gear, how about this one from INIU? It's almost as small as the AirPods case. It has a 10,000 mAh battery, 2 USB-C ports and 1 USB-A port. So if we go absolute bananas, we can charge all 3 devices at the same time. The non-affiliated link will be in the description. I was given this power bank for free, but no money was paid for the shoutout. Okay, back to me mourning about ergonomics. The mode dial in Ricoh GR4 is locked by default, which is great. But the unlocking mechanism is quite stiff, even after months of usage. So you have to press the unlock button and click through the modes really hard. Honestly, it feels as if it's either broken or not properly lubed. But I tried it on multiple GR4 bodies and they all had the same feel. And the final thing that gave me a bad time was the logic of these 3 user presets. Those presets cover most of the settings, including the button mappings and shooting settings. So if you wish to map a button to a different function across all the modes, you'll have to do the mapping 3 times. But that's okay, that makes sense. But let's say I'm in U1. I have my ISO set to 200 and I switch it to 400. If I turn it off and back on, it keeps the change. That's good. But now I switch to U2 and back to U1. And it rolls back to 200 again. So I have to switch to 400, go and save the settings until I need to change it again. I understand that it's probably just me problem, but worth sharing. So, if you ever ask a bicycle enthusiast about which bike you should buy, they will happily tell you that you should buy one of each kind. So, does it apply to our cameras? I took all 3 of them to my recent vacation, and after careful filtering, I got 489 photos. I knew that most photos were taken on an iPhone because sometimes I didn't have the other 2 on me, and also I needed ultra-wide shots and teleshots. So the main question was if I kept more photos from the Fuji or from the Ricoh. And these are the results. Shot on iPhone, 238 photos. Expected. Shot on Fuji, 125 photos. Shot on Ricoh, 126 photos. The experiment didn't help really. So yeah, they're all good but in their own way, and hopefully my video helped you a little bit. Thanks for watching, hit a like and consider subscribing if you haven't already. It's been Alex, and see you at the Geeks Table. Bye bye.